The crash was nothing short of catastrophic. A sudden malfunction in the ship's navigation system sent the small spacecraft hurtling through space like a pinball, ricocheting off invisible walls of unknown energy. The pilot, a human man, gripped the controls with all his strength, fighting against the force that threatened to tear him apart. In a panic, he tried to regain control, but it was no use. The ship plummeted toward the surface of an unknown planet, the planet's gravity dragging it down faster and faster. With a deafening crash, the ship hit the ground. The man was thrown forward, his body slamming against the cockpit. For a long moment, everything was silent. Dazed and groggy, he slowly opened his eyes. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead. But other than that, he felt mostly unharmed. His heart raced as he checked the ship's systems, but the damage was severe. The communication array was completely destroyed, and the navigation system was nothing more than a pile of broken circuits. He was stranded, alone. He glanced out the broken window and saw a strange, vibrant landscape stretching before him. The sky was an unusual shade of purple, and the ground was covered with thick, lush vegetation. Towering trees with long, twisting branches rose high into the air, their leaves glowing in a soft, unnatural light. It was like nothing he had ever seen before. His first instinct was to try and take off again, but with the ship in pieces and no way to fix it, escape wasn't an option. He sighed and unbuckled his seatbelt, standing up unsteadily. The air smelled fresh, but had an almost chemical scent to it, something alien to his senses. He stepped out of the wreckage and found himself in a clearing surrounded by tall, glowing plants. There was no sign of any other life. No animals, no movement, just the sound of wind rustling through the trees. "Where am I?" he muttered to himself. The question hung in the air, unanswered. His first order of business was to figure out how to survive. He had no idea where he was, but he knew one thing. He had to find food and water. He gathered what little he could from the wrecked ship, some basic supplies, a flare gun, and a first aid kit, and set off into the dense forest. The landscape was unlike anything on Earth, but the colors were breathtaking. He couldn't help but be in awe of the beauty surrounding him, even though the situation was dire. Hours passed, and the human man wandered deeper into the forest. He didn't know what kind of creatures lived here, or if any did at all, but he had to be cautious. The last thing he wanted was to encounter something dangerous. His stomach growled in protest, and he realized he had to find food fast. But the forest seemed empty. No animals were rustling in the trees or scurrying along the ground. It was as if this planet was devoid of life, except for him. As the sun began to set, the light took on a strange, shimmering quality. It wasn't like Earth's sunset, more like the glow of some otherworldly phenomenon. He sat down on a rock, exhausted, trying to come up with a plan. Maybe there was a nearby settlement or research station. It was possible, though unlikely. His best chance was to keep moving, explore, and hope he found something to survive. That's when he heard it. A soft rustling sound, followed by a faint melodic hum. His head whipped around, his heart racing. He hadn't heard any creatures up until now. The sound was almost like singing. Hesitant, he stood up and followed the noise, pushing through the thick foliage. His pulse quickened as he moved closer, the sounds growing louder, more distinct. Then he saw them. A group of women. At least 5 or 6 of them, all standing in a circle near the edge of a glowing clearing. They were unlike any humans he had ever seen. Their skin was a pale shade of green, almost glowing in the strange light of the planet. Their hair was long and flowing, in shades of blue and silver, and their eyes, bright, glowing eyes, shined in the dimming light. They stood perfectly still, their hands raised toward the sky, humming in unison. The human man stood frozen, unsure of what to do. These women didn't look like anything he had encountered before. They were beautiful, almost ethereal, but something about them sent a chill down his spine. He had no idea whether they were friendly or dangerous. The last thing he wanted was to make the wrong move. One of the women turned her head slightly, her glowing eyes meeting his. There was a moment of silence. Then, without warning, she stepped toward him, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she were floating rather than walking. "Who are you?" the human man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The words came out awkwardly, unsure of whether they would be understood. The woman's lips parted in a smile, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. There was something in her eyes that suggested curiosity, or perhaps something else. "You are different," she said, her voice musical and soft. "You are the only one." The human man's heart skipped a beat. "The only one? What do you mean?" he asked, his confusion growing. The woman tilted her head, studying him carefully. "You are a male, the only one here," she said, her words slow and deliberate. He stood there, stunned, as the reality of the situation began to sink in. "Am I the only man on this planet?" he whispered to himself, still unable to believe it. The alien woman smiled again, her eyes glimmering with unspoken thoughts. The human man stood frozen, staring at the group of alien women before him. His mind raced, still processing the words that the woman had spoken. The only one here. It seemed impossible. How could he be the only male on an entire planet? He had crash-landed on a planet he knew nothing about, and now he was facing beings unlike anything he had ever seen. The woman who had spoken to him stepped closer, her movements smooth and graceful. Her glowing eyes studied him with a curiosity he couldn't understand. The other women around her remained silent, watching him with the same glowing intensity. The man swallowed nervously, trying to gather his thoughts. He had to be careful. He didn't know who, or what, these women were, or if they posed a threat to him. I don't understand," he stammered. "What do you mean, I'm the only one? Where are the others? Are there more people here?" The woman smiled softly, but there was no warmth in it. "There are no others," she said. "Only you. The others left long ago." The human's confusion deepened. "The others left. What does that mean? Where are they now?" The woman's eyes flickered with something he couldn't place. Perhaps sadness. But then she spoke again, her voice still calm and measured. "The males of our kind are gone. We remain, but we need what you have." The man's heart raced as the meaning of her words slowly began to sink in. "You're saying you need me." He tried to make sense of what she was suggesting. "But why me? What happened to the rest of your kind?" One of the other women, standing slightly behind the first, spoke for the first time. "Our kind is unique. We have no males to reproduce. Without a male, we cannot survive. You are the only one who can help us." Her voice was soft, but filled with a kind of quiet desperation. The human man's mind was spinning. Reproduction. He had heard stories of alien species who could reproduce in different ways, but it was something completely different. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but the urgency in their voices told him that they weren't asking for help. They were demanding it. "I don't know what you mean," he said, backing up a little. "I'm just one man. I can't. I mean, I didn't come here to do anything like that. I'm stranded. I need to figure out how to survive, how to fix my ship." The woman who had first spoken to him stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. "Your ship is no longer important. What is important now is us. You are our only chance. Without you, we will perish." The other women moved in closer, circling around him slowly. The human man felt trapped, surrounded by these strange beings with their glowing eyes and unblinking stares. They weren't threatening him outright, but the intensity of their gaze made him feel as though they were studying him, judging him. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "We need you," one of them said again, her tone insistent. "We are the last of our kind, and we cannot continue without a male like you." The man felt a cold chill run through his body. This was more than just a misunderstanding. This wasn't about helping them fix something or finding a way off the planet. It was about something far more personal. He was the only one they could rely on, the only man on this entire planet. He took a step back, trying to process everything. He had always thought of himself as resourceful, able to survive in tough situations, but this was beyond anything he had ever imagined. He didn't know how to respond. Was he supposed to help them? Could he even help them? I don't know what to do, he admitted, his voice strained. I'm just one man. I didn't sign up for this. I didn't come here to. I don't know what you're asking me for. The woman who had first spoken to him stepped forward again, her eyes softening for the briefest moment. We ask for nothing more than your help. Nothing more than what you can give. Her words felt strangely comforting, yet they also carried an undertone of urgency. These women, whoever they were, had been living on this planet alone, without males, for a long time. And now, they had found him, the only human male. He didn't know if that was a blessing or a curse. The sun had fully set now, and the glow of the plants and the alien sky bathed the scene in an eerie light. The group of women didn't speak again for a long time. The silence hung between them, and the human man felt as though something was being expected of him, something he didn't understand. Finally, he broke the silence. I need food, water, and shelter, he said, his voice firm. I can't think about whatever this is right now. I need to survive. The women looked at each other before the first one spoke again, her voice calm. We will provide for you. We will help you. You are not alone here, not anymore. The human man didn't know whether to feel relieved or more afraid. They might offer him food, shelter, and protection, but what would that cost him? What were they really asking for? He couldn't help but feel like a pawn in some larger, unknown game. They needed him, but for what purpose? As they led him deeper into the forest, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap, one he might never be able to escape from. The human man walked cautiously behind the group of alien women, his mind swirling with questions. The soft, glowing light of the alien planet surrounded them, casting strange shadows on the forest floor. The air smelled unfamiliar, sweet but heavy with the scent of alien plants that were unlike anything he had ever encountered. He glanced nervously at the women surrounding him, each one a little different, yet all sharing the same glowing eyes and radiant, blue-green skin. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way, but their beauty only made him feel more out of place. His thoughts raced. Why me? Why am I the only man here? What do they want from me? He tried to focus on something else, anything else, but the questions kept coming. They had made it clear that they needed him, but they hadn't explained exactly why or what would happen next. He had only just begun to realize the gravity of the situation. The woman who had spoken to him earlier, the one who seemed to be in charge, led the group. Her name, if she had one, remained unknown to him. She walked gracefully, her eyes occasionally glancing over her shoulder to make sure he was still following. The others were silent, their expressions unreadable, but their presence was overwhelming. Every step they took seemed deliberate, as though they were all part of something much larger than him. They reached a clearing deep in the forest, and the human man couldn't help but notice how the place seemed to pulse with life. The plants here were tall and twisted, glowing with vibrant colors, and the trees were unlike any he had seen before. The air buzzed with a strange energy. It was beautiful in its own way, but also unnerving. He had no idea what kind of world he had landed on. The woman in front stopped at the center of the clearing and turned to face him. "This is where you will stay," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We will provide for you. You will be safe here." The human man glanced around. The clearing was surrounded by thick, glowing vegetation, and in the center there was a large, strange structure. It was built from some kind of shimmering material that seemed to change color as the light hit it. It looked like a mix between a house and a temple, and it was surrounded by a soft, pulsing energy field. He looked back at the woman. "I don't understand. What exactly do you want from me?" Her expression softened, though there was still a serious tone to her words. "We want only what you can give. You are the last chance for our people. Without you, we will not survive." The man's heart sank as the weight of her words settled in. He still didn't fully understand, but he could feel the urgency in her voice. It wasn't just about helping them. It was about something much bigger, something that could decide the fate of this entire species. "But what do you mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What am I supposed to do?" The woman stepped closer, her eyes locking with his. "You are the only male. Without you, we cannot reproduce. We need you to save us." His mind reeled. He had heard of alien species that reproduced in different ways. But this was beyond anything he could have imagined. He was just one man. And these women, these strange beings, were asking for his help in a way that felt unnatural. The other women stood silently behind the first, their eyes fixed on him, waiting for his response. The air was thick with tension, and the human man could feel the pressure building. There was no way out. He was stuck on a planet with no way to return home, surrounded by beings who needed him for reasons he couldn't fully comprehend. I didn't come here for this," he said, his voice tight. "I just want to get home. I didn't ask for any of this." The woman took another step closer, her face now only a few inches from his. "You have no choice," she said softly. "You are the only one who can help us. Without you, we will die." The human man felt a shiver run down his spine. Her words were so direct, so cold, that they left no room for doubt. He could feel the weight of her gaze, as though she was trying to read him, understand what he was thinking. But how could he explain that he didn't want to be a part of this? He had never asked for any of this, and yet here he was, caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. As the woman continued to stare at him, a sense of hopelessness began to creep into his chest. There was no escape. He was alone on a strange world with no allies and no way to return home. His mind raced, trying to think of a solution, but there was nothing he could do. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman smiled slightly. "Now you stay with us. You are part of our future. There is no going back." He didn't know what to think, but one thing was clear. His life had just become far more complicated than he could have ever imagined. He was a prisoner on a world he didn't understand, surrounded by women who were depending on him for their survival. What kind of life could he have here? And more importantly, what kind of man would he have to become to survive? The days on the alien planet blurred together as the human man settled into his new life. At first, everything felt like a dream. An impossible dream he had never asked for. He had tried to keep his distance, to figure out some way to escape, but it became clear that there was no easy way out. The alien women were patient with him, but their intentions were always clear. He was the key to their survival, and they would not let him forget that. His daily routine had become predictable. The woman who had first spoken to him, the one who seemed to be their leader, would often visit him. Her presence was commanding, but there was also a strange tenderness to her that he couldn't quite understand. She would speak to him softly, but her words were always heavy with meaning. "You must understand," she would say, "without you, we cannot carry on. We need you to help us live." It felt strange to be needed like this, to be viewed as the only hope for an entire species. The weight of responsibility was suffocating. At times, he would catch himself thinking about his life back on Earth, his friends, his family, his home. But those thoughts quickly faded. He couldn't go back. The world he had known was far away, unreachable, and all that remained now was this alien planet and these strange, beautiful women who had no choice but to depend on him. Each day, the women would come to him, bringing him food and gifts, strange fruits that glowed and pulsed with energy, soft fabrics that shimmered in the light, and sometimes curious devices he didn't understand. They treated him well, but there was always an unspoken tension in the air. They were waiting for something from him, and he was starting to realize just how important that something was. One day, after what felt like weeks of quiet, the leader approached him again, her eyes full of something he couldn't quite place. Hope, desperation, a mix of both. He had learned to read her expression a little, but this was different. She was looking at him with more intensity than ever before. "We need you now," she said softly, her voice almost pleading. "The time has come. There is no more waiting. If we don't act soon, our species may be lost forever." The human man felt his stomach tighten. He didn't want to be the one to decide the fate of an entire race. He wasn't ready for this. He hadn't even been ready to be trapped on this planet, let alone to be the solution to their survival. "I don't understand," he said, his voice shaking with confusion. "How can I, one man, save all of you? I'm just a human." The woman stepped closer, her face inches from his. "You are not just any man," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You are the last hope. You hold the key to our future. Without you, we cannot continue." Her words were so direct, so final, that they left no room for argument. He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, and it felt like the pressure of an entire species was bearing down on his shoulders. What could he do? What choice did he have? He had tried to hold on to the idea that he could escape, that somehow he could find a way back to his own world. But the reality was clear now. This was his life. This alien planet, these women, and this strange, urgent need for his help. There was no turning back. For the first time since his arrival, the human man looked around him, really looked at his surroundings. The alien landscape was beautiful, but it was also stark and alien. He was completely out of his element. The plants, the creatures, the architecture, it all felt so strange, so distant from anything he had ever known. He realized then that he was no longer the man he used to be. The world he had come from felt like a distant memory. The leader noticed his change in expression and smiled faintly. "I see you are beginning to understand," she said softly. "This is our reality now. This is where you belong." His mind raced. Was this his fate? To be a part of this alien world? He had no answers. All he knew was that these women, who were so different from him, were depending on him for their very survival. They needed him in ways that were far more complicated than anything he had ever imagined. But did he have the strength to carry that burden? Could he really make a difference in the survival of an entire species? The question swirled in his mind, but the answer was never clear. "I don't know if I can do this," he whispered, more to himself than to her. The leader's eyes softened. "You can. You have to. There is no other way." The human man looked into her eyes, searching for any sign of doubt, any hint that there was another way out. But there was none. She was certain, and so were the others. They were depending on him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "What happens now?" The leader reached out and touched his arm gently. "Now we prepare. Together, we will create a new future for our people, a future where we are not alone." Her words struck him deeply. Not alone. That was what this was about. He wasn't just a tool to save their species. He was part of something greater, something beyond his understanding. He was part of their future. And whether he liked it or not, his future was now bound to theirs. The days after their conversation felt different to the human man. The weight of his situation pressed heavily on him. He couldn't deny it anymore. The alien women were right. They needed him, and the future of their species rested in his hands. He had tried to ignore the reality, to convince himself there must be some way to escape, but now he knew the truth. This was his life now. As the sun rose each day, the alien landscape seemed to come alive with color and movement, but none of it could distract him from the thoughts swirling in his mind. The women had been kind, patient, and respectful, but they were also insistent. Every day they looked at him with hope in their eyes, and every day he felt more trapped. The leader came to him again, as she always did with her steady, calm presence. But today there was something different in her expression, a sense of urgency, even desperation. She walked towards him, her footsteps quiet on the soft grass beneath their feet. "We don't have much time," she said, her voice low but firm. "The window for survival is closing, and we need you to act now." The human man swallowed hard. He could see the fear in her eyes, the fear of losing everything. These women had trusted him, believed in him, and now they were asking for more than just his help. They were asking for his life. They wanted him to be a part of their future, to share in the creation of a new generation. The idea was overwhelming, and yet he couldn't bring himself to say no. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he admitted, his voice rough. "I don't know if I can do what you're asking." The leader's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. "You don't have to be ready," she said gently. "None of us were ready for the changes we are facing. But this is the only way. You are our last hope." His heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what would come next, what the future held, but he understood that the responsibility was now his. The fate of an entire species rested on his decision, and there was no turning back. "Why me?" he asked quietly. "Why me, of all people?" The leader looked at him with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "You are human," she said softly, "and we need the strength that comes from your kind. Your species has survived through wars, disasters, and hardships. You have the resilience we need. Your biology, your spirit, it is what will help us endure." Her words struck a chord deep inside him. He had always seen humanity's weaknesses: wars, conflicts, greed. But now he was being told that these very things made them strong, that they had something to offer to a dying species. His mind was racing, but he knew one thing for sure: he couldn't turn his back on them. The leader reached out and gently touched his arm. "You have the power to change everything. You have the power to give us a future." The human man took a deep breath, his mind still spinning. He didn't know how to begin, or what would happen next, but he knew one thing: he had to make a choice. He couldn't keep running from it. The longer he delayed, the more he felt like he was betraying the women who had given him everything. They had taken him in when he was lost, shown him kindness when he was alone. Now they needed him in a way that he hadn't expected, but in a way that made him realize how far his connection to them had grown. "I'll do it," he said, the words escaping his lips before he could stop them. The moment they left his mouth, he felt a strange sense of relief mixed with fear. The decision had been made. There was no going back now. The leader smiled, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft with emotion. "You don't know how much this means to us." He nodded, though the full weight of what he had agreed to hadn't fully sunk in yet. He could already feel the change happening inside him. The decision had set a new path for him, one that would forever tie him to this planet and its people. He wasn't sure what would come next, but he knew that he couldn't escape it. The future was now in his hands. The other women came forward, their faces full of hope. They stood silently behind the leader, waiting for confirmation, waiting for him to truly understand the gravity of what they were asking. One of them, a woman with bright blue skin and flowing silver hair, stepped forward and spoke for the first time. "We will support you," she said, her voice warm and gentle. "Together, we will create a new future." Her words brought a sense of calm to the human man. The decision had been made, but he wasn't alone in it. They were all in this together. As the days passed, the human man could feel the sense of unity building between him and the alien women. Though the challenges ahead were unknown, one thing was clear: they would face them together. As night fell over the alien landscape, the human man stood with the women, looking up at the stars. The weight of the decision still hung heavy in the air, but there was a quiet sense of peace among them. Tomorrow, they would begin the next phase of their journey, their future and his. The human man woke up the next morning with a strange feeling. His decision the day before had set something in motion. He had chosen to stay and help these alien women. But now, as the sun rose on the alien world, the weight of that choice felt heavier than ever. He had agreed to be their hope, their future. But what did that really mean? What would it take from him? And what would it cost? He stood up, his feet touching the soft, green grass beneath him. The air was thick with the scent of unknown flowers and strange plants. In a way, it was beautiful, but this wasn't just a new world. It was a world where he, a human, was the only man left. He had been thrust into a place where he was needed in ways he had never imagined. And that thought made his heart race with uncertainty. The leader came to him again. She had a calm expression, but there was something in her eyes, a quiet strength mixed with concern. The others followed her, all of them giving him space but watching closely, as if waiting for him to take another step. "You seem troubled," the leader said, her voice soft and understanding. "This is not an easy task for you, but you have made the right choice." The human man nodded, though the doubt inside him still lingered. He wanted to believe her. He wanted to believe he could help them, that he could be the man they needed. But he wasn't sure if he had what it took. He had always been just one man, never a savior, never someone who could change the fate of an entire species. "I know I said I would help," he said slowly, his voice unsure. "But I feel like I don't fully understand what I'm supposed to do." The leader smiled, her eyes filled with understanding. "It is natural to feel that way. We were all uncertain at first, but together, we will find our way." She turned and gestured for him to follow. The others moved aside to make space for him, and he walked behind them as they moved deeper into the alien forest. The towering trees, with their glowing leaves, seemed to watch over them, creating a path forward that was both comforting and mysterious. Soon, they reached a clearing. It was here that the leader stopped and turned to face him. "We need to prepare," she said, her tone serious. "We need to begin what you promised us. The survival of our species depends on you, and we must start now. Are you ready?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. The human man took a deep breath, looking around at the women. They were all waiting for him, their eyes filled with expectation. This was it. There was no more time for doubt. He had to step forward, not just for himself, but for them. "I'm ready," he said, the words feeling more certain now. The fear was still there, but it was mixed with something else, something deeper. It was a sense of responsibility, a sense of purpose. For the first time since he had arrived on this world, he felt that he wasn't just a stranger in a strange land. He had a role to play. He had a purpose. The leader nodded, a small but proud smile appearing on her face. "Good. Then let us begin." She reached out and took his hand, leading him to the center of the clearing. The others gathered around, their eyes watching him closely. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and for the first time, he felt the weight of what he had agreed to. But there was something else, too, a sense of unity, a sense that he was no longer alone in this. The leader spoke again, her voice strong and clear. "We will perform a ceremony, a bond between you and us. This is how we begin our new future. It is a symbol of our trust in you and of your commitment to us." The human man stood still, his heart pounding in his chest. He had known this would be a big moment, but the reality of it hit him hard. He had promised to help them, but now, as he stood there, surrounded by these women, he realized that this was more than just helping. It was a commitment. It was a promise to be a part of something much larger than himself. The leader stepped forward and touched his chest. Her hand was warm against his skin, and he felt a strange sensation, like a spark of energy passing between them. It wasn't painful, but it was powerful, like something had awakened inside him. "This bond will tie us together," she said softly. "It will give you the strength you need, and it will give us hope. We will share our energy, our strength, and our future with you." The other women closed in, each of them placing a hand on his arms, shoulders, or back. The sensation grew stronger, like a wave of energy flowing through him. He could feel something changing inside him, something deep and powerful. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, spiritual even. The bond was real, and it was more than he had ever imagined. He closed his eyes, letting the feeling wash over him. This was the moment of truth. He was no longer just a human man stranded on an alien world. He was part of something bigger, something that held the future of an entire species. When the ceremony ended, the air felt different. The bond had been formed. The human man opened his eyes and looked around at the women. They were all watching him with expressions of hope, trust, and determination. "I'm with you," he said, his voice steady now, his heart filled with purpose. "Together, we will make this work." The leader nodded again, her eyes shining with gratitude. "We knew you were the one," she said softly. "Now let's build the future." As the human man stood there, surrounded by the alien women, he knew that everything had changed. He had made a choice, and now he was committed. The future was uncertain, but he wasn't afraid anymore. With them, he had a purpose, and together, they would face whatever came next. The days after the ceremony passed quickly. The human man, now fully integrated into the life of the alien women, began to understand the depth of his commitment. He was no longer a stranger. He was part of their community, their future. But while he had learned much about them, there was still so much more to discover. They were unlike anything he had ever encountered before, and yet there was a growing connection between them. As the human man spent more time with the alien women, he realized that their world was a place of harmony and beauty. They lived in a peaceful, thriving environment where everything seemed to be in balance. The towering trees, the flowing rivers, the gentle hum of nature. It was all different from Earth, but there was something familiar about it too. It was a world full of potential, full of promise. Yet, despite this beauty, there was still work to be done. The human man knew that the bond they had formed wasn't just symbolic. It was the beginning of something greater, something that would take time and effort to build. The women had placed their trust in him, and it was up to him to help them create the future they dreamed of. One morning, the leader approached him. Her expression was serious, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "We have made progress, but there is much more to be done. We must begin to build the foundations for our future." The human man nodded. He understood. The bond they had formed wasn't just about survival. It was about thriving, about creating something that would last. He had promised to help them, and now he had to keep that promise. "What do we need to do?" he asked, eager to take action. The leader smiled. "We need to begin creating a community. The first step is to teach you our ways, our culture. You need to understand what makes us strong, what makes us who we are. Only then can we build together." The human man agreed without hesitation. He was ready. He had learned a lot about their world in the past few days, but he knew that there was much more to discover. The alien women had a rich history, a deep culture that had been passed down through generations. He was about to become part of it, and he couldn't wait to learn everything. Over the next few weeks, the human man immersed himself in their way of life. He learned their language, their customs, and their beliefs. He spent time with the women, understanding the bond they shared with each other and with their world. He was amazed by their wisdom and strength. Each day, he felt more connected to them, more a part of their future. But as the human man learned more about their culture, he also discovered something troubling. The alien women had been through much in the past. Their world had been ravaged by war, and their numbers had dwindled to just a handful. They were survivors, but they had suffered. They had lost so much. The human man realized that their survival wasn't just about having a man to help them reproduce. It was about healing, about rebuilding what had been lost. They needed more than just a new beginning. They needed hope, and they needed each other. One day, as he sat with the leader, he asked her a question that had been on his mind for days. What happens next? What do we do when the future is uncertain? The leader looked at him, her eyes filled with both sorrow and determination. We build, we create, we never give up. The future may be uncertain, but as long as we are together, we will face it with strength. Her words resonated deeply with the human man. He had come to this alien world unsure of his purpose, but now he understood. He wasn't just here to help them survive. He was here to help them rebuild, to help them create a future where they could thrive once again. Together, the human man and the alien women worked tirelessly. They began to build new homes, new structures that would serve as the foundation of their community. The human man used the knowledge he had gained from Earth to help design more efficient systems, better ways to harvest resources, and tools to improve their daily lives. The alien women, in turn, taught him their ways, how to use the energy from their world to fuel their technology, how to live in harmony with nature, and how to strengthen their bond as a community. As the weeks turned into months, the changes were evident. The village was growing, becoming more vibrant and alive with each passing day. The once quiet land was now filled with activity, new homes, new families, and new hope. The human man looked around, feeling a deep sense of pride. This was no longer just a place he had stumbled upon by accident. This was home. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, the human man stood at the edge of the village, looking out over the land. The alien women gathered around him, their faces filled with gratitude and hope. "We have come so far," the leader said, her voice filled with pride. "You have helped us create a future that is ours." The human man smiled, his heart swelling with a sense of accomplishment. "It's not just me. It's all of us. We did this together." The leader nodded, her eyes filled with warmth. "Together, we are strong, and together, we will face whatever challenges the future holds." As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the human man knew that their journey had only just begun. The future was still uncertain, but with the alien women by his side, he was no longer afraid. Together, they had built something beautiful, a community, a family, and a future. And as the night settled in, the human man realized that this world, this strange and beautiful place, had become his home, and he would fight to protect it, no matter what.